What we do here on Mondays is we spend some time with our friend, Dr. Dennis Norem from Mercy Health, talking a little COVID-19. What's the latest? What are we hearing? Where are we going? And other things. Dr. Norem, good morning to you.
Good morning to you guys.
How's everything going this morning?
Oh, it's going well. Back here in good old Rockford and enjoying some cooler weather.
Yeah, for the time being. Then get a little more Arizona-like for you.
Well, probably not the triple digits that I was seeing.
That's true. Arizona gets to keep that for themselves. Hey, the CDC reversed course again on Friday, and now they're recommending that people get tested if they come into contact with someone who has coronavirus, even if they are asymptomatic.
Yes, very interesting that that was done. Not clear why the initial change in testing asymptomatic individuals. I think we all suspect there were some political issues there.
So if what's the best way to get tested right now? Is the clinics we see pop up, the parking lot testing stations, or going to see your primary physician? What's the best way to do it?
Certainly, I think it's preferable to see your primary physician. That way you have a established relationship and you know who's going to get you the results. And again, the turnaround times in the offices are really pretty good. Generally speaking, 48 hours. There are some pop-up testing stations. If you don't have a primary physician, I think that's a second choice. But I think if you have any question, get tested.
It says, due to the significance of asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic transmission, this guidance further reinforces the need to test asymptomatic persons, including close contacts of a person with documented SARS-CoV infection. Close contact means coming within 6 feet of a person with documented coronavirus for at least 15 minutes. Even if you test negative, you should still self-isolate for 2 weeks because a single negative test doesn't mean you'll remain negative at any point after that test. So somebody gets a negative test, you should still go ahead and do the quarantine?
Well, that's going to be a little difficult. I think that is their CDC recommendation. I think you have to be a little bit aware of what the risk is in terms of that exposure. And I think that's why it's helpful to be able to discuss this with your primary physician as what you should be doing.
Do you guys ever do two tests? In the same week, just to rule out false negatives?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a good idea. If you're highly suspicious you have a negative test, there's no reason you can't turn around within 24 hours, 48 hours, and be tested again. It's hoped that we'll have more availability of the rapid testing here soon, which would even make that situation more important because the rapid testing, as we've discussed, is not quite as sensitive. There's more false negatives with the rapid test. On the other hand, you get the results very quickly, and you can turn around and test yourself within the next day. I think if there's any doubt, I highly encourage people to get tested.
How are you guys doing, just speaking to your office, is the only thing on number of tests? Or any risk of you guys running out of tests?
Not aware at this time. It appears that our testing situation, at least at Mercy, is adequate in terms of supplies and numbers and personnel. So unless there was a shortage, I think we really, again, want people to get tested.
Speaking of testing, I'm reading Canadian health officials announced a new coronavirus test that consists of gargling and spitting, a much less invasive test. The patient uses a saline solution to swirl, gargle, and spit. First test of its kind in the world, could provide an easier means of testing mass populations in an effort to return to normal.
Well, I think we've talked about previously that there are other spit tests on the market, and here locally, the University of Illinois is expanding that capability through the College of Medicine to allow a spit test. And this sounds like it's just a variation of the saliva spit test, which is certainly much easier than having that probe stuck all the way to your brain. So
I've read several people comment on that over the weekend, talking about how deeply into the nose you go for one of those things.
Yeah, I had a family member actually out in New Mexico area comment to my wife that she thought it was the worst thing that ever happened to her.
Wow.
She felt like she was invaded, and I thought, well, come on, it's not that bad. and it's certainly necessary. So
I was going to say, especially if she's got kids. Really? I mean, this was worse?
Yeah. Well, she hasn't had children yet, so I think she has a surprise coming.
Oh, yeah.
Not that bad.
The COVID test is soon going to get knocked to number 2.
Yeah, very quickly. But, yes, I think the saliva test, the spit test, any variation of that would certainly make things easier for people.
Have you seen the saliva test used? I mean, have you seen the physical test yet?
No, I have not. And again, I think the only place that it's available, and I'm not sure the U of I here at the College of Medicine has quite rolled it out yet, but they certainly are going to, as they've been using it starting in Champaign.
Yes.
They were testing the college kids down there with their own saliva test.
Dr. Norem, I'm curious to get your take on this one. Apparently, we as a people, Americans, are divided on the forthcoming coronavirus vaccine. A new Pew Research Center poll, 51%, just 51% said they would get vaccinated for the disease if that vaccine were available today. That's a 21% drop from May, when 72% of us said we would definitely or probably get a vaccine.
I think that's unfortunate. And again, I think some of the politics around COVID has contributed to that. There's a concern by people, and it's a legitimate concern, that this thing is going to be rolled out so quickly that the testing won't be adequate. And I think that's very unfortunate. I think the other thing that's happening is there's a little bit less anxiety about COVID now. A few months ago, we were talking about the fact that we need a vaccine and that's going to solve our problem. And now things have slowed down a little bit, and people are thinking, well, maybe it's not as bad as we thought, and maybe I won't jump right in and get that vaccine right now. Maybe I'll kind of wait. I think that's unfortunate. I still have faith that we'll have a safe, approved vaccine. When we do, I would hope people would get it. It really ultimately is going to be the thing that will get this COVID infection under control.
Well, we'll be leaning on your advice for that if it comes out. Yeah, so get ready to tell us yes or no.
Yeah, these numbers are weird. 77% of Americans think the vaccine will be approved before the safety and effectiveness are fully understood. Now, you had CEOs of 9 drug companies signing a pledge earlier in the month to make clear their commitment to developing and testing potential vaccines for COVID-19 in accordance with high ethical standards and sound scientific principles.
Yeah, I again have faith in the regulating bodies, CDC, and the experts to tell us we have a safe, effective vaccine, and that at that point I'm certainly going to get it. Hopefully it will be available, hopefully by the end of the year, but who knows? I mean, we've seen that one of the vaccine trials had to be stopped from AstraZeneca because of some side effect issues, and that has to be investigated, and that sometimes can delay vaccines for months. So we're not there yet, and I think this idea that we're going to have something by Election Day, that's, of course, not going to happen.
The other vaccine alternative the word I've heard popping up a couple times last week is herd immunity. We discussed the herd immunity on this show, I think, a couple months ago when it first popped up. Is it still as untenable in the short range? I mean, are we still sitting at you need about 60% or 200 million people in this country to be infected before herd immunity would be effective?
I think that's probably true. Although I did see a report on Sweden, which is interesting. And as you can see, Europe, which is ahead of us on the COVID curve, they're starting to see a resurgence, and some people are calling in some countries their second wave. They've not seen that yet in Sweden. So it remains to be seen. They probably have not reached herd immunity, but they certainly have a much higher exposure rate given the way they approached the COVID from the beginning. So there may be some benefit from having higher incidence in that country, short of herd immunity. That still can slow down the spread, along with all the other safety features that we're trying to do.
You look at some of Sweden's numbers. According to the European Center for Disease Control, Sweden has reported 30.3 new COVID-19 cases per 100,000 inhabitants in the last 2 weeks. compared with 292.2 in Spain, 172.1 in France, 61.8 in the UK, and 69.2 in Denmark, all of which imposed strict lockdowns early in the pandemic. Overall, Sweden has 88,237 reported infections, 5,864 fatalities, or 57.5 deaths per 100,000 inhabitants since the beginning of the crisis. So there was a lot of criticism leveled at Sweden at the beginning. Some of that has backed off, and now we're in, the waiting period?
I think so. It remains to be seen. This may just be the fact that with a higher exposure rate, their second wave may come later. Who knows? But again, this is just part of what we've said from the beginning. We're learning still about this virus and how it affects things and how it works. We just don't have the answers completely yet.
Talking to some bar owners around the area, they're kind of nervous about the direction our numbers in the area are going, and that might lead to more restrictions down the road. You looked at our numbers, I'm sure, pretty closely. Are you concerned about the way we're trending here in the state line?
That is a concern, absolutely. And I think another concern is as the weather changes, there's going to be less outdoor dining and seating, and people are going to be indoors. And as we've seen, that is a risk factor. These situations where we have several people infected in one gathering has to do with having people indoors. And you've seen this information that just came out, I think, a few days ago, clearly that the virus is spread not only with droplets but with the aerosols. And when you get many people in a room with poor ventilation, and bars are notorious for this, that's a sure place where the virus can be spread. So yeah, I would be a little nervous as we see a little uptick in the rate and the fact that there's going to be less opportunity for us to be outside.
Then you look at other countries who are really tightening the screws in certain cases. Britain's government says they're going to fine people who refuse an order to self-isolate up to £10,000, which is about $13,000, as they've seen a surge in some coronavirus infections.
Yeah, I hope that we don't get to that point where we have to start fining people, and the police have enough to do without having to chase down corona criminals.
Yeah, corona criminals, corona violators, whatever the tag will be that we'll call them at that particular point. But yeah, looking at about a $10,000 fine for breaking quarantine in the UK right now. We'll see how rigidly that's enforced.
Well, and I'm not sure, are you going to arrest those people and book them and bring them to the jail and that, knowing that they may have coronavirus? I mean, that just opens up a whole can of worms.
Yeah, so we just ask people to behave themselves.
Right, because that's worked very well.
It's worked really well so far.
Yeah, in Sweden.
Yeah.
It's worked well. Well, it's worked well in certain areas of the country. Obviously, it hasn't worked so well on college campuses. Asking kids to behave themselves doesn't work very well.
No.
Yeah, and any of us who have them or were one ourselves understand this concept fully.
Oh, I see the idiots down there on campuses. And I go, yeah, that would have been me.
Yeah,
that would have
been many of us.
Would have been me 20 years ago. I know it would have.
Yeah. Especially when you're of the age of immortality.
Nothing can touch you.
Right, absolutely. Young people think, I'm not going to get sick. Even if I do, it's going to be like having a bad cold. And the other problem is they only think about themselves. Generally, that's true. At their age, they're probably going to be fine. It's going to be a minor disease. But they are spreaders. And, they get sick, and then they spread it to family members, and then we have a problem.
Real quick before we let you go, speaking of the young kids in college campuses, Big Ten announced football back just last week. One of their big concerns is the myocarditis in young people that catch the disease. How much do you know about that?
That's very interesting. I've seen that there's possibly as high as a third of young adults who get significant COVID infection may experience myocarditis. It's a concern because in some people, when they have myocarditis, they end up with permanent effect on the heart, causing heart failure. And it's not well understood how many of those people will recover and how many of them will end up with permanent damage. I did see that they're going to require any athlete who has active COVID infection to have to undergo an echocardiogram, which would evaluate them for the myocarditis before they return to sporting activity. But again, something we're learning about COVID-19 that we didn't know in the past.
And there is so much that falls under that category, too, because this has been a work in progress from the very get-go and continues to be so. Dr. Norem, as always, we appreciate the time. We appreciate the expertise. And if you're willing, we'd love to join, get together once again next Monday and kick this around again.
It sounds good, guys. I'll see you next week.
We appreciate it.